Hello and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. I'm Martin Ramsey, your host. We've been away for 2 weeks, a variety of holidays. Thankfully, nothing worth talking about in contemporaneous football. So let's go back to 1998, shall we, and pick up the story of the 98-99 season, a rather unforgettable one. Last time we were all here, we discussed the summer ins and outs. Now it's time to get into the action. Adam is here. How are we? Is that a Napoli strip I see before me?
It is, yeah. 1989, I think. I'm good, thank you. Myself and David enjoyed a little light-hearted top 5 kits last week, and I'm keen to get back into the real stuff now.
David, I'm not going to ask you to give me 10 Ramon singles so that you can wear that t-shirt, but I know you could.
You know, I could
for an hour.
But two albums, Rocket to Russia, End of a Century. There you go. So I'm allowed to wear the t-shirt. Yeah,
I trust you will.
Yes, yeah, all good. Myself and Mr. on a musical front, myself and Mr. Adam over there scored tickets to a sellout gig next week that we thought we'd missed. I got the impression that Adam was keen to go to it and that it was announced 5 months ago, and he has brought it up once a week ever since that we didn't have tickets. So eventually I snapped and just went and bought us two from one of those horrible reselling sites. 70 quid in fees. 70 quid in fees to send me an e-ticket. But hey, I'm chill. But not really looking forward to this. One of the things we're going to talk about was Gullit to Newcastle, which I still think is one of the most under-discussed yet fascinating things of this era. That this was an appointment that just looked you cannot miss. And my goodness, it missed.
Let's start there then, because it's pretty quick in the season. An August managerial change. You kind of get them now, but this still seemed a bit weird. Newcastle, the FA Cup, as we discussed last time, gave them a little bit of buoyancy, but not much. I mean, the league form was pretty wretched in that season. And as it does, David, it tends to bleed into the next one. Kenny Dalglish never really set the place alight. Certainly fans who'd come to expect a certain, shall we say, brand of football years before that became a thing. It's nothing new. And a couple of draws. It's not like an absolutely catastrophic start to the season. A draw at Chelsea, very, very good side, of course, but a 0-0 opening day showing against a newly promoted team. If you have doubts, you really want your manager and team to really kick in immediately, and that was kind of the end of that. Talk about the Dalglish thing, and then we'll get into Gullit, because, as you say, it seems to tick all of those Newcastle boxes, really.
Yeah, a Newcastle fan got in touch with the show, and what he said to me was, when he thinks of the Keegan era, he thinks of a smile, and when he thinks of the Dalglish era, he thinks of a scowl. And I thought that was pretty opposite, that the whole Dalglish reign, there seemed to be this darkness, this sour taste for the whole period, and I can't quite explain why. Dalglish had a different personality, obviously, but it didn't happen at his other clubs managerially. He didn't have that cloud that seemed to follow him around at Newcastle. And I think maybe, as we discussed on previous shows, it was perhaps just that they were heartbroken, and he was the rebound relationship, and that obviously had sort of doomed it from the start, because everything he did was compared to Kevin Keegan and the feelings, and that's what you want. You want them to replicate those feelings that you had, but you can't, because Newcastle are a different club in 1997 than they were in 1992. That great rush of energy and excitement that was the first few Keegan years. You're looking for a manager to replicate that, and I don't believe that it's possible to do that. There was almost an innocence, really, to early Keegan Newcastle and the way that they played and the success that they had. I think that there was this sense that it was all just a slog for everyone connected at Newcastle under Dalglish, for him, for the players, for the fans. And I think it was one of these relationships where, you've probably given it, both sides have given it all they could, and you've been to marriage counselling, and you've still come away and it's not working, and it is just time to go, do you know what, let's just finish this, let's just end it as amicably as possible. I was still surprised at an August sacking. Yeah, I mean, I think I've become, through our own club, but also, football in general, I've become sort of desensitized to October, first international. In fact, I now expect them. But August, it's like, why was he the right guy in June and he's the wrong guy in August? I'm not a great fan, Martin, of these. We still hear them now. Manager X has 3 games to save his job that the club will brief, and I'm sort of like, if he's the right guy, then he's the right guy for you. If he's the wrong guy, you should sack him. These 3 games should be utterly irrelevant. But I think it means you're always chasing your tail, aren't you? Because a new manager is coming in. Okay, transfers different, but a new manager is coming in. He hasn't had a pre-season. He's got to get straight in to work with the guys. He doesn't get really a chance to get his own ideas across. And I think to me that it's a symptom of where Newcastle were as a club in this period, that they were almost freewheeling decisions, and it was all about getting through to the next month. And when you get into that sort of mindset, then clear long-term thinking, or even slightly longer-term thinking, because it's football, you can't, these 3 to 5 year plans clubs talk about always make me laugh. But I think that with Newcastle, it almost led to an extension of, here is a club in chaos that is chasing its tail, trying to discover or rediscover something that it feels that it should be and isn't. So I was a bit surprised when he went, and then, of course, the replacement, though, I mentioned at the start, I have to say, I thought, oh, they've nailed that.
Yeah. Just a final word on Dalglish. He's a dry personality anyway. I think that's probably fair to say, even at his happiest. He was spiky through at Blackburn. He would be that pretty miserable presence, to my mind anyway, at Celtic later on, and even that return to Liverpool. I think for understandable reasons. I think that he was burnt out by that job initially for a whole variety of reasons, and I don't think it's any surprise that he would be a little caustic. It just wasn't a good fit. But Adam, as David said, Ruud Gullit and sexy football seemed the absolute ideal fit. Here is going back to, in the mind's eye anyway, and certainly the average supporter on the street, the most Kevin Keegan-esque manager maybe kicking about in the Premier League, or had been kicking about in the Premier League during that time. Not entirely sure it translates as nicely as that, but I can kind of see where they're coming from.
Can see where they're coming from, but it's just one of those things. Just wanting that to be the case doesn't make it the case. Like it's we're going to do this and try and get back to this continental style of play. Gullit, a strange one. There's that Paul Dalglish actually is at Newcastle at this time, isn't he? He starts okay, but then there's a bit of a falling out because I think Kenny Dalglish is still talking to players and members of staff, etc., and Gullit doesn't quite like that. So there's an interview where he pulls Paul Dalglish into the office and said, "Your dad's been a bit unfair. Can you tell him to stop it?" Basically, and Paul said, "Well, with the greatest of respect, can you? Here's my dad's number. If you want to go and speak to him, then you can do that." And basically, Paul Dalglish never played again for Newcastle after that. So it's fine to want the big glitzy glamour names, etc., but you have to be able to back it up, I think. And I'm not really sure that Gullit, he would have felt, again, don't know him, but assuming the personality, he'd have felt like he was doing Newcastle a favour there by going there, and I just don't think those things ever really work. There's an element of nostalgia with Newcastle trying to get that back together, and then and Gullit thinking he can just go there and be a god, and it never really quite works out that way.
Did the soundbite drive that, Adam, the sexy football thing that he'd already kind of coined whilst at Chelsea, really? That this seems more like our kind of spiritual.
No, I think so.
leader.
I think so. I think what Ruud Gullit thinks he would like to be as a manager doesn't always translate to what he was, as far as I'm concerned. He just thinks because he's been this player and he's been at Chelsea, he should have this gravitas and everybody should just bow down to him, which is not really how it works. Like I said, it's a misalignment of expectation versus reality, I guess. So yeah, just saying it isn't enough for it actually to happen.
And Davey, it is one thing believing that's the way football should be played. I think he said that he first kind of coined that phrase while watching Portugal versus Czech Republic. So it must be that Euro 96 quarter final. It was actually the way that Portugal played that this is kind of smooth and it's sexy in a way. But he did have some of those components at Chelsea that he did well. There was just, obviously a bit of a falling out. He wasn't as if he was a disaster at Chelsea at all, but he had players that I think he could use in that way. I'm not entirely sure that the Newcastle squad was quite like that. And also, if you're going to be successful at Newcastle at this time, you kind of need to get on with the captain.
Well, on that, yeah, I think Adam's point, expectations are slightly different here. When Ruud Gullit takes over at Chelsea, it's up and coming. It's a club who are on the way up. It's a club who are cool and who see themselves as being, cool and everybody's second favourite, King's Road, all of that stuff. Newcastle see themselves in 1998 as a destination club, as a title contender. However, you're right, it's a functional squad. I mean, it is. It's not a Keegan squad, really. I mean, there's a lot of obviously loyal lieutenants there, but when you look at the makeup of that Newcastle squad, it is a functional squad which is designed to funnel the ball reasonably quickly into positions for Alan Shearer to score. And Dalglish, and it always surprised me because, Martin, you and I are old enough to remember that Liverpool team of his who were phenomenal at football, and actual football, playing, passing, dribbling, everything you want to call it. They were great. His Blackburn and Newcastle teams, he went for physicality and functionality. And I've never really heard him talk about what changed for him to do that. Maybe he just simply felt at Liverpool I had some of the best players that were kicking a football at the time, and I didn't have that at Blackburn, and I didn't have that at Newcastle. The Shearer thing, to Adam's point about Gullit, he is arrogant. He has a stereotypically Dutch style personality. We in Britain would call it arrogance. They wouldn't call it that in Holland or the Netherlands. Show my age there. Or in Italy, they would just call it well-deserved confidence and abilities, which he has earned. But he's a top dog. He is going to have to be the top dog, and he's going to have to be treated as a top dog. At Newcastle, you can never be the very toppest of dogs. You can be up there. You can share the plinth. You cannot have it to yourself. Alan Shearer is on that. He is a phenomenal player. I mean, now in the running for Newcastle's greatest ever. He is the captain. Well, he wasn't the captain at the time, but he is the talisman, the focus. He's England's number one striker as well, which is another important facet of everything that carries. And you have got to make the accommodation. You have got to say, right, okay, the reality of this is now maybe you shouldn't have to, and maybe as a manager you should be able to go in and do whatever the hell you like, but you have got to treat certain players in a certain way. That is just the reality. It's a Ferguson Cantona thing again. That there are players who you have just got to get on with. And what I would say about Cantona and about Shearer is you were not dealing with guys who were coming in still stinking of booze from the night before, guys who were crashing cars, or you had good professionals. This was a professional disagreement. This is not Ferguson Beckham, and you have to take into account that, look, I get this. This guy is the absolute rock that this club is currently built on, and I just don't think that in Gullit's mind that possibility exists. He is Ruud Gullit, and he is the manager, and therefore those two things make his position utterly impregnable. Now, we know with hindsight how it all falls down, but I do think that was a mistake he made from the start. You have got to get close to the star player and let him know you think he's a star player and manage him accordingly. Because if you don't, the fan base, who especially up there, incredibly loyal and to one of their own, you will lose that battle. And in the end, of course, he does.
His unveiling, with lots of cultural appropriation, lots of Ruud Gullit wigs, I'm not entirely sure would fly quite so well these days. Liverpool come with the joint managers and all that and absolutely batter, or I'll be a bit more precise, Michael Owen eviscerates Newcastle. He has a 32-minute hat-trick. Well, he has scored the hat-trick within 32 minutes. He scores the winner for Liverpool on the opening day. They were behind, I think, at Southampton. They kind of clawed their way back, and he gets that winner. I know we've talked about it, Adam. Go back and watch, especially that performance at St James's Park, just how lethal, how frightening, how much of the future that boy, and he was a boy at this time, he's still 17, he represents. It's incredible stuff. Or 18.
He scores the 3 Michael Owen goals in this game. Is probably the best way to describe that. It's capitalising that reaction and instincts, and then being able to run one-on-one against poor Philippe Albert. And then, the other one is just the dribbling ability that he had, and the fantastic finish. So, not the best start. Obviously, Liverpool, as we mentioned, are juggling 2 managers. Newcastle have just moved manager, but it wasn't the best start at all. Owen, I know we spoke about him quite a bit recently, but I think it is easy to sort of divorce the international exploits sometimes. I know he has a great couple of years here, but all the focus really is on what he did at that World Cup. So for him to take it into this season and get this hat-trick early doors and go on and be great, I think it's we spoke about this before. There was nobody that would be thinking that Michael Owen was not here for the long term, as in Liverpool elite, all that sort of stuff. It just felt like this was someone arriving and would be here for quite some time. And these 3 goals in this game, he was electric.
And basically, as Maradona says, all of his World Cup exploits, he's the only thing I've enjoyed in this World Cup. He'll be a force if he stays fit, which of course is always around the corner, sadly. Okay, we've got plenty more to discuss. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back after this. Welcome back to And It's Live. Okay, 98-99, just about getting underway. Davey, a few teams to talk about in this part of the show that probably wouldn't get many mentions throughout the series. Charlton, one of the promoted sides. Alan Curbishley has arrived. They start quite brightly, that nice 0-0 away at Newcastle, then absolutely twat Sheffield Wednesday 5-0 at home. I think they draw at Highbury as well. It will eventually all be in vain. They'll miss out. Sorry, spoiler alert. But they will be back, and they will absolutely be a kind of Premier League regular for 5-6 seasons. But that Curbishley smile and cheek and character is pretty much there from the off. I think he seems like a man who knows he's onto a thing here. Maybe just need that year of experience, but he knows he's got a good gig.
The Eddie Howe of the late 20th century. There are a lot of parallels with Bournemouth, although I would argue that Charlton Athletic are a bigger club than Bournemouth. I sometimes think people out with London maybe struggle to understand how big Brentford or QPR or Charlton. Now look at the attendances, right? London's a really big place, and there are a lot of people living there. But they became, through this period, I feel, the model club of how you go about things, which is that you aim for promotion, you give it a right good go to stay up, and you don't overcommit financially. If you get relegated, okay, you go down, you take the money, you regroup, and you go again. You're realistic when you first arrive that you might go back down, but you'll certainly have a real good go at it. And then when you come back up, you're a year more experienced because of that Premier League run, and you stick with the manager, and he'll have learned as well. And you know already he can get you out of the Championship, so you take him back with you, and you come back up, and you establish yourself as a solid Premier League club. This model has been followed several times. I think Bournemouth, Brighton spring to mind, Burnley under Sean Dyche spring to mind, that these were clubs who all did that and who all went up. Charlton's start kind of surprised me at the time, but with more evidence of other clubs having done it now, shouldn't have, because this is a club on a real high. I mean, I remember the late 80s, Charlton can't play at the Valley. You know, Valley was overgrown and desolate. And in fact, I believe there was a political party formed to get Charlton back to the Valley that actually stood in local elections on that issue. And the upswing that they are still experiencing when they get into the Premier League, it's unsurprising that form carries on at the start. Promoted teams that can often have a good start because they have arrived after doing so well to get there. They are used to winning. And it's why we see double relegations more than logically should happen, because those teams are used to losing. And the mindset sticks for a while. It quite often lasts for about a half a season. I can think recently of Hull City, Sheffield United, in their first season under Chris Wilder when they came up, that the momentum can maybe carry you to about Christmas, and then it's have you done enough to stay up, and then the second season is the real the real tester. But Alan Curbishley was he was a Londoner, he was well spoken, he was quite urbane, quite relaxed, calm, likeable. And I think that his Charlton team won a lot of admirers because of the style of football that they played. They had pace, Martin. They had real pace, and that will always give you an opportunity, and they would continue to do that for a few years. They also then became a model in a way for clubs like that on what not to do when their fans got comfy in the Premier League, and we will come to that obviously later on. That this next level, well, we need to get rid of Kirby. Well, what's the next level? We're stuck here being mid-table safe every year. That's as good as it gets. And I know that that's, easy for me to say as an outsider and maybe disappointing to hear if you're a fan of those clubs, but that is your level, right? That is as good as it gets. You stabilise there, and that's where you aim to be. And there may well be years where you can go on and do something really special, but the idea that it automatically flows, there is a glass ceiling based on size of club. I'm sorry, it just is. And Charlton became the poster boys for that, with a careful what you wish for, whatever you want to call it. But right now, they were vibrant, they were exciting, they were quick, and they were causing teams a lot of problems. And as you mentioned there, Martin, they arrive up and they make a lot of friends really, really quickly under Alan Curbishley, and seemed a very good addition at the time.
They're just so, solid, sensible. Danny Mills, Chris Powell, kind of fullback, Sasa Illich and goal. I think Mark Kinsella was a decent player, club captain. Clive Mendonca had propelled them to that
season before,
promised land with that fantastic playoff game against Sunderland.
He will always be known as that, yes, the playoff bloke.
I experience around like Mark Bright, Graham Stewart, and I guess for the future, although they made a couple of appearances, I think, a very young Scott Parker, Paul Konchesky. I think you're absolutely right. They would become quite a good model. I guess we will talk about Curbishley and Charlton in future episodes, Adam. But what did he represent about, I guess, English management at that time? Not exactly in rude health at this moment, and to be honest, won't be ever ever again, to be honest. But again, a lot of people projecting a lot of hope onto him as a next big thing, a bright young thing.
Yeah, I think it's quite easy to just assume that they're like a kind of prototype of Stoke, maybe based on your own stereotypes, bias, or whatever, because it is someone that comes up, the manager is well organised, etc. But they were really attacking, like David said. They had loads of pace. They always had a good goal scorer or two, and they had quite modern forwards. Maybe not this time, but in their next time up, there's a few in there that maybe wouldn't look out of place now. So yeah, he's one of those that I think definitely when they come up again, I'd like to dig into in a bit more detail to see that, because we haven't really picked a team yet and looked through their tactics and broke them down in that way. So I think it is key to shine a bit of a light on them. But yeah, for me, I liked him. I thought his teams, they did not play good football or great football, if you want to put it as the literal definition of lots and lots of nice passing and all that sort of stuff. But they were functional, organised, and they had lots of goals in them. I wouldn't ever describe them as a Wimbledon or a Stoke or anything like that. I think there was a little bit more to them. And yeah, you're right about Curbishley. It's one of those ones that I mean, he doesn't necessarily disappear, but I think maybe David nailed it there with some of the conversation about natural ceilings for clubs, and I think you maybe see that with managers as well. There are some who maybe just hit a point and they're like, right, am I a big club manager? Am I this? Am I that? And I think Curbishley for me just sort of fits where he was. It's no surprise he was there for such a long time. I think there's a lot to be said for that sometimes. We see managers try and maybe go above their out of their comfort zone and crash and burn and then never get another job again, or they've been stung by it. It takes them a long time to sort of build themselves back up. Gasperini's always the example I go to in Serie A for that, where he got the Inter job 15 years ago as not a young man, but it just completely burned him, and he spent over a decade basically trying to build himself back up again. So there's a lot to be said for that, I think, of just knowing where you are, being quite happy with it. And I think Curbishley and Charlton were a really good match in that respect, and they had a lot of relative success for Charlton, certainly in the latter part of his career there.
By the end of September, David, which we'll kind of wrap up here on this show, the two sides at the top of the table, in fact, the three sides at the top of the table, because I'll include Wimbledon in that. It's Wimbledon, Derby County, and Aston Villa. Jim Smith at Derby County, again, not an up-and-coming English manager, but very much one of experience and standing in the game. Caused a few problems the season before, possibly cost Manchester United title, maybe. They're very, very dangerous in that one shop in Dean Sturridge kind of combination. They've got experience. Again, just some solid pros around that team. Maybe, I don't know if it's unfair to say, maybe more towards Stoke than Charlton were, but they were absolutely a handful, Davey.
Yeah, they were. Jim Smith, as you say, the Bald Eagle, his nickname was, and obviously I can sympathise with half of that. A man who'd been through a lot, a man who'd worked with Robert Maxwell for a number of years at Oxford United, and has the scars to prove it. But yeah, they were. Yeah, really, I keep saying this word today, but it's true. They were a functional side, but with the added icing on the cake of a tricky forward in Paolo One-Shop, who was you don't really get too many players like this at the top level in England now, where I can't think of many players who you can use the term uncoordinated with. Is there anyone I'm missing? Some great eccentric, top that. But One Chop was that guy that, he could fall over his own legs at one moment, but then he could do an absolutely devastating run. And the old cliche, of course, as well, he doesn't know what he's going to do next, so the other sides couldn't do. I don't think teams can carry players like that now because of the, things like your pressing and shape and whatnot, and dynamism. But he was one of those players as a neutral you're excited to watch. Dean Sturridge, really good player, quick, intelligent, great movement, good finisher. And I remember at the time Christian Daly, the Scotland international, had gone down to Derby County from Dundee United. I think he was one of the earliest Scottish Bosmans. And he was asked about it, and he said he was slightly surprised by, again, the size of the club, because he said Derby is a one-club town. It's a big town, and it's got one club, and everyone supports it. And, of course, Derby's place in the English firmament is there. The 2 league wins in the 70s, of course. Brian Clough, Dave Mackay, Roy McFarlane, Colin Todd. The names trip, Archie Gemmell, the names trip off the tongue. But I think that, they'd had the doldrum period, and then, the co-ownership under Maxwell, obviously. And there was a real sort of sense of excitement around them, stadium changes, of course. And they seemed upwardly mobile, Martin, to use an 80s term, I think, Derby. They looked like a side who kind of felt that they were where they belonged to be. And then it did feel like that was where they belonged, in the firmament of English football. But I thought that handful's the right word. You were never going to get an easy game against Derby County because they were big, they were robust, they were physical, but they could play. And, the clubs that you mentioned there, Wimbledon, by this stage, this is not crazy gang era Wimbledon, but nor were the early progenitors of tiki-taka. They knew what they wanted to do, and they simplified it, and they did it well. But I think it's, again, an illustration of where we were in the league at that time, that really up until season 25-26, where we have seen the return of long throws, Royal Rumbles at corners, etc., that we are still in a different era here. There is still a lot of cross-pollination of 80s football. It's being mixed now, that we're getting players from abroad, we're getting higher technical level players coming in. It's much more common, but there are still people who are doing things in 1998 that would have been getting done 10 years earlier, and they're not dinosaurs at this point for doing it. And I think Jim Smith fits into that. But I really enjoyed Derby this season, and a large part of that was Paolo One Chop, because he was a maverick.
They were a kind of rare, like a weird oxymoron with Derby, where I quite liked almost all of their forwards, but they just never scored enough goals. Like, I remember Francesco Baiano, when they signed him the summer before from Serie A. I thought, well, that's a really interesting sign. Not quite up there with the Ravanelli ones, but a kind of good solid one that would take a functional team, as David said, up a level. Obviously, Paolo One Chop. Then they've got Dean Sturridge, Dylan Burton, Michael Beck was kicking about there as well at this time. So there was a complement of forwards that you think, all right, okay, but they just never scored enough goals. I mean, I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on this, but there did seem to be a bit of a post-World Cup hangover. There wasn't a lot of goals this year in this league, certainly goals scored. I think only six teams get more than 50 goals in the league, which in a 38-goal game season is not a lot. And Derby finished, I think it was 7th, they only scored 40 goals, so just over a goal a game, or literally just over a goal a game. So there was a little bit of a hangover there, yeah. But I always found that a really weird oxymoron with Derby. Anytime you watch him, you think he's a good forward, and they just never put it all together.
One team who were putting it all together at the start of their season was Aston Villa, guys, because they blaze through their opening games. I think there's 12 games before they lose. Obviously, fiery summer with the Dwight Yorke transfer, and John Gregory's quite calm and statesman-like acceptance of that. They used the money well. They got Paul Merson from Middlesbrough. We talked about it just slightly after the season had started because the Yorke transfer was a bit protracted. And Merson basically saying like Middlesbrough wasn't great for him and his issues. And yeah, maybe other players at the club at the time, perhaps not who he needed to be hanging around with. And Gregory again really is out the arc. This kind of stuff in these kind of comments, basically saying he won't have any problems like that here. The worst he'll get is that we've got a couple of players who like to dress up as women and some kind of vaguely homophobic kind of connotations in there. The press pack roared with laughter at his stand-up routine, but a very good signing, and Merson really getting that lease of life at the end of still a storied career, but a troubled one. And he was superb for Villa, and they have that attacking threat. Collingwood's there, of course, still, and Dion Dublin. You've got the youth of Julian Josham as well. Lee Hendry is probably kicking around at that time. It's not a bad balanced team, Adam. It'll run out of gas, obviously, where we're not talking about Aston Villa's glorious treble, but they are the early pace setters, and I do wonder if there's just a bit of spite, a bit of rage about the Dwight Yorke thing. To Dwight, we'll show these guys that we are not that second rate, we're not minnows, and we're kind of here to fight. They certainly did at the start.
Yeah, adding that experience into the team, I think, in the summer was key for sure. With some of those players that came in from other Premier League teams as well, which I think is something that was undervalued for quite a long time, and actually seems to be has flipped back again in the last 4 or 5 years. Bringing in players that are doing well at other clubs will help you progress. Yeah, I liked Villa. I did. I know John Gregory obviously questionable, but I thought it was a rare back three team that I quite enjoyed, because they didn't pretend to be anything that they weren't. They wanted to get the ball forward quickly. Dion Dublin, Julian Josham, and then obviously Paul Merson coming in there, I think sort of pulls that all together. But I like the energy and intensity that they played with as well, particularly in this season. It was a largely kind of British squad, but they went for it. They pressed, and I think he kind of tried to bring in a bit of a fearless attitude to them, to say like, let's just be arrogant, let's just try and be on a level with your Manchester Uniteds and with your Arsenals, and it certainly is a terrific start. Julian Josham had a really good season.
Yeah,
this season,
he really did. And again, some other youth like Gareth Barry and Alan Thompson from Bolton was a good signing. We talked about that last time.
Like Samuels,
yeah, it's that kind of experience there. Ian Taylor again, another very reliable pro kicking about. Were they a round peg, round hole kind of team, Adam, in terms of how he went about fitting them all in?
I think so. I mean, it's nothing, like I said, it's based on fast attacking, getting the ball forward to Dion Dublin, having Paul Merson there if you need to unlock a defence. I think it was just really well suited to the players that he had. And like I said, we spoke a little bit, it might actually be quite a few seasons before, but about some of those younger players coming through, and maybe you could say they ran out of steam, or the experience that they had there wasn't quite on the level a few years ago. But I think you look at that transfer business in the summer, and some of those players coming in are really solid pros that can get you through some hard times. And I think it's just a really nice mix. So yeah, right place, right time, for as long as it lasts.
Just briefly before we go for another break, talked about Curbishley again. We know the paucity of English managers and what the 21st century would really bring. But there is a lot of noise about guys like Curbishley and John Gregory around this particular time. Danny Wilson, a young manager at Sheffield Wednesday. Even the more experienced ones like Jim Smith and Harry Redknapp, in fact, at West Ham. I mean, I don't know how many English managers are in the Premier League at the moment, although maybe double check, and we can come back to this at another time. But that's one thing that looks very, very different from this period of time, and certainly outside of the British Isles, Wenger, Vialli, Gullit, that's your whack. That there's because the players are changing, right? You get loads and loads of foreign players in just about every squad, but the guidance, obviously Wenger maybe really sets the turbo in that. Adam, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think it's I think Wenger. You never really know what the main cause of it, but I think Wenger coming in is just such a big. It's a big surprise to everyone, I guess. First of all, and maybe it just changes those conventional ways. I know we spoke about how it is. Everything is changing very, very quickly. Like every year that goes past, I'm amazed that it's only 1 year since we said lots of things are changing. But I think though, when something like a Wenger thing happens, there's a ripple effect that you're never really quite sure. You're never really quite sure what the effects are, and there could be certain things happening in the background as well. Like it's English football never really went through the whole German refresh that we see with this reboot and all that sort of stuff, or if they did, it was never really talked about in as much detail. But I think it's quite clear that at some point, probably 15, 20 years ago, they decided that they had to do something in terms of the evolution of players, the coaching, all that sort of stuff. Whether it is a byproduct of Wenger coming in and saying this is the way that we do it, I'm not so sure. Whether it's just natural, things evolve and things progress. But I do agree with you. I think it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And I think whether Wenger was the trailblazer or the catalyst for it, I think he's undoubtedly had a major role in it.
Yeah. Currently 4 English. We're recording this in the dying embers of 25-26. 4 English managers in the 20. 2 of them are interim. You might add Michael Carrick into a kind of grey area. Who knows? But I guess Eddie Howe pretty much the only one who's started the season and is still in post. What of the Manchester Uniteds and the Arsenals, as you said, Adam, otherwise known as Manchester United and Arsenal? We'll pick that up after the break. Welcome back to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. We are in part 2 of a 4-part series on 98-99. We've talked a lot, David, about variety of footballers and managers, some cultural influences in this series so far. Now it's time for the Secretary for Trade and Industry, Stephen Byers, to enter the fray in the Premier League story, for it was he who ultimately put the blockers on Rupert Murdoch's and BSkyB's attempted takeover of Manchester United that was floated around this time for monopoly reasons. The broadcaster, in bed with the biggest club in the league, that ties that up forever, basically. Glad to see that's changed anyway over the course of time. But this was big news, and that prospect was big news. Manchester United fans railed against it. A lot of football fans kind of railed against it. Give what you wish for, I suppose. But it was yet another move where those boundaries between clubs and media, clubs and the real power brokers were merging and blurring evermore.
They'd let it go through now, wouldn't they? Don't think there's much doubt about that. But I have a vague memory when you mentioned the name Stephen Byers. Was he had to resign in disgrace? Did he not? I can't recall, but there was definitely some sort of scandal attached.
No, disgrace in the late 90s was different.
Yes.
Maybe sending an email without copying in the relevant people was enough for politicians to resign.
People resigned.
Yeah.
Don't get that.
People did resign.
Yeah. For younger viewers, resigning means to voluntarily leave your job after you've been caught doing something wrong. You clearly won't be familiar with it, but it used to happen. Yeah, look, I mean, it's clear you do not need to be a monopolies and mergers expert to see the conflict of interest here. It is clearly, therefore, in the broadcaster's best interests as a corporate partner to further and ensure the success of Manchester United. Many, of course, would argue that television at this point were willing to do it voluntarily without any financial inducement anyway. I'm sure up here we would say fairly similar about that. But yeah, it's such, as you say, Martin, this is such an early sign of where this game is going. When money arrives, serious money people will follow. And money had arrived in football now. And we now, of course, have seen where that path has led us to, where clubs are owned by states, are owned by hedge funds, huge multimedia conglomerates. And this is a very early sign of where that was going and the value that it could have brought in. And listen, from a purely business point of view, not taking into account the emotion which surrounds football or whatever, you can absolutely see why they would feel, and I hate this word and I apologise, but still, the synergy that you've got Sky and therefore, you broadcast this. Here is the top club in the league, the most well-supported, the most glamorous. If we have them as well, then this is a marriage made in heaven. But you can also see why the other clubs and everyone else would be against it. And you're right about United fans. That's one thing. There should be no accusations of hypocrisy here. There was no enthusiasm or taste for this to happen among the Manchester United support. They were consistent. I think that's maybe one of the greatest things, Martin, that has changed in the last 30 years. That before, when large faceless corporations came in and wanted to take over a football club, that the fans were very, very reticent indeed. Now, provided that they don't have a litany of dodgy transactions behind them, people get excited about the funds that it's going to bring. And you just need to look at Newcastle as proof of that with PIF, that they were absolutely delighted. You mentioned cultural appropriation with the Hullet wigs. There was a fair bit of, I believe Newcastle actually had to say to their fans, didn't they, to stop wearing...
You stop getting tea towels out the fucking cupboard and wrapping them over your head, you fucking idiot.
They said to their fans, look, we appreciate the sentiment behind it. We know it's done in praise, but we would just rather you didn't. Yeah, I think it would have been a blatant and negative effect, because clearly then they would rule out, they would push the concerns. I was actually just sort of shivering and thinking, what would that be like in the VAR era, with the amount of power that the cameras and also the amount of focus. Again, we are just, really from the internet catching fire in terms of being used by everyone and the power that it now wields in the 21st century. And we're pre-social media, but it's on the way. You've got chat rooms and whatnot, that sort of embryonic ability to bring people together. And a TV company owning a football club and being able to push whatever agenda would be hugely advantageous to that one particular club. Unfortunately, though, as we can see, as we look around the modern football industry, it means that it's led to the sad area where if you're an ex-Manchester United player, you just can't get arrested to get on television these days. You never see any of them. And maybe that's a sad consequence of this, he said, and waited for the lightning bolt to hit and hoped I was wearing rubber soles for when it arrives. But yeah, you can see the logic, but it was the right thing to rule it out. What it did say, though, what it did say is it told the world that the world's biggest football club, certainly at least top two football clubs, was in play. That it was that they were available.
Well, indeed. On the field, Adam, we kind of talked about this last week. David Beckham, absolutely under the microscope, had to come up with a very late free kick to get United a point at home to Leicester, 2-0 down. late goals may well be a feature of this season. Upton Park was probably the worst he saw in terms of that response. That's where the effigy was being burned, and the sentiment that he had let his country down. He should be receiving soldiers' wages, and soldiers should be receiving his, and all that kind of nonsense. But it's a slow start for Arsenal as well. I don't think that's fair to say. They beat Forest in the opening day, then 4 draws, 3 of which were 0-0. Admittedly, 2 away to Liverpool and Chelsea, not exactly terrible results. Away to Leicester City, again, not exactly a dreadful results. However, not a brilliant start, and they met after that run of games in the 20th of September. And Arsenal were as dominant then as they were in the Charity Shield, as dominant as they were at Old Trafford in that 1-0 game, 3-0 this time. Tony Adams and then Nicholas Anelka. I think Freddie Ljungberg made his debut. He finished it off with a lovely goal, and Nicky Butt was sent off. And yeah, Arsenal kind of kicking into gear, you think, but United sluggish.
Definitely, yeah. I think that was the second game in a row Nicky Butt was sent off. And I think, I mean, they're already doing very well, Arsenal, in this game, but yeah, it just all seemed to fall apart. And yeah, you're right. It wasn't the quickest start for both of them. Maybe we are starting to see that, mentioned earlier on, this post international competition hangover. It's kind of par for the course now that we know pre-seasons get interrupted, but maybe we're starting to see it a little bit more now, because we've now got Premier League players that are competing in the later stages of these tournaments, and then having to do their big pre-season and then come back into it. So maybe the slow starts are not to be expected. Yeah, I think the Freddie Ljungberg goal again, Peter Schmeichel, it's amazing how many times he gets chipped. I know we've spoken about it before, given the size of him, but really good finish for Ljungberg coming on. Petit doesn't make this game, so Stephen Hughes steps in. Maybe starting to see some of Wenger's youth development policy coming to the fore a little bit more. But yeah, great for Arsenal to bounce back. You're right to point out that it was 4 draws, but having to play Liverpool, Chelsea and Man United with 2 of them away in your first 6 games of the season is a tough ask. And I guess to come through that unbeaten and still be in the mix, I guess shows everything. They go on a really, really good run over the winter. I think Arsenal, which really helps them out. United do similar. And yeah, it's all, if it doesn't feel like it at the time, obviously with Villa, and we mentioned Derby there, sort of setting the pace, it did feel like only a matter of time before they sort of got their legs going and started to get going in the season. But yeah, this was as dominant a game for Arsenal as I can remember. And they were well worth 3 points and the 3 goals.
We'll get to it, obviously, in the next episodes or so, but it's sluggish for both. I mean, I think by Christmas time, or just before Christmas, they've played 18 games each. Both of them have in terms of cumulative results, they've won as many games as they've lost. I mean, that
World Cup, baby.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and also just Ferguson was big in this, right? It's about being fit and ready, stay in the hunt, in the hunt, and then once the bells are rung of the new year, you put the foot down. That's what both teams did, and that's what gave us such an absolutely thrilling climb. And I dare say the fact that there's no one as hot as Villa were early, as nice a team as Chelsea were. There's no one there to say, you're nowhere, lads, and I'm going to leave you in the dust because, we're ready to go. As we've seen in, recent iterations of the Premier League, you maybe just can't afford that kind of sluggishness all the time. United faced Liverpool immediately afterwards, gents, and they won 2-0. kind of back on the horse. But again, it's a real intermittent form. You would have thought Arsenal would be back in form after that. They go to Sheffield Wednesday, lowly Sheffield Wednesday, on the 26th of September. And this is where we'll finish, because it's a very, very interesting day. Arsenal lost, David, to a late goal, a very nice goal by Briscoe, but nowhere near the story of the game, not even the story of the day. We'll come to that in a minute on that particular weekend. But yeah, referee Paul Alcock, not a banner day for him and his Italian player that he was trying to assert his authority over.
Yeah, still one of the most shocking and hilarious things I have ever seen on a football pitch. Di Canio, not to cast aspersions on someone's personality, but he's always struck me as a fairly emotional fellow in my time watching him. And of course, we up here had known a bit before. I'd seen him play in Milan, then obviously I'd seen him play at Celtic, and it is a part of who he is, which is why I was absolutely stunned when he went into management. But yeah, just you can't pigeonhole people. Nigel Winterburn's face in the background is absolutely wonderful here. And yeah, I think Alcock's, it's the way he falls. It's sometimes you'd as well just drop him, right? He tries to keep his bait. Look, you couldn't book him. We'd need to reward him for his honesty, because he tries to stay on his feet here. But in the end, he does everything he can to stay on his feet. So he is practicing what he preaches, but in the end, gravity wins. And it was a foul, there's no doubt that you had two hands on the chest. You've got to give it. And it was shocking, and it seems almost quaint now, doesn't it? But at the time, life bans were being mooted, thrown about. You cannot do that. You cannot lay your hands on a referee, and you can't, and you still can't, shove a referee or be violent towards a referee. It's really terrible behaviour. But at that point, you thought that's his career, certainly in England, over. Because there's just no way that people are going to put up for that. And yet within 2 years, he's getting an award from FIFA for fair play. So, there's your redemption story. There's your arc. But it's so hard to judge or it's so hard to discuss in a way, because at the time, shock, revulsion, I cannot believe this has happened. Where has our game gone? Look at what these hot-headed foreigners are coming and they're bringing. If it's not Cantona kicking fans, it's Paolo Di Canio on our big brave boys, our referees. And then now you look at it and it's, the wee push, the comedy fall, Winterburn's, involuntary purse grabbing. The fact his name was Alcock, everything about it is absolutely wonderful. But yeah, at the time, people are going to watch the footage. Younger people are going to watch footage and they're going to laugh and wonder why the hell it dominated the news cycle the way it did. Well, it did. And next morning, Martin, I remember reading in the broadsheets, not just the Sun or whatever. That's him. He's got to go. He should never be allowed to play a Premier League game again.
Absolutely. Tottenham Hotspur on the same day hosted Leeds United. Tottenham Hotspur, who had sacked Christian Gross, bless his wee heart, earlier in the month. And there wasn't just speculation that George Graham might end up at White Hart Lane, Adam. They had been talking about it in the week before the game, and basically a deal was reached with Graham. It was more a Leeds issue, and an absolutely incredible kind of situation. It's 3-3. It's quite an entertaining game, but this would be Graham's last at Leeds. He would make that move to Spurs. We kind of see it with players a lot. on the edge of a move near the window, and they kind of come up against this team. Usually they're kind of left out if it's getting quite close. We've been involved in something kind of similar back in 2017 when we played Aberdeen, and Derek McInnes was quite far on in conversations to become the Rangers manager. Obviously that didn't happen, but his Aberdeen team looked very subdued, which is very unlike an Aberdeen team playing Rangers at home, and I think we won 3-0 that day. But this is just ridiculous looking back, and only George Graham can just brazenly shrug that off as if it's just business. Your thoughts on that situation, but also, he's a former Arsenal legend. Going to manage Spurs is incredible. But this Leeds team, Adam, are on the brink of something pretty good. And they would be, they do well this season. They'd punch quite high. We know what's kind of coming around the corner in terms of, well, in a variety of different ways in the new millennium. I guess it shows the draw, A, of London, and B, the pool of those historic Big Five clubs, and Spurs still have that at this time.
Yeah, it's so funny how football can just pull these little subplots from nowhere at times. That way when you've got a player or a manager who has been at your club, and then the next year you just get a feeling you're going to get drawn against them in the Champions League or the Europa League or something, and it just seems to come to pass. It's a weird kind of fate type thing. And yeah, I don't know what he's thinking, to be honest, because it's not even with the benefit of hindsight, but it's clear that Leeds are on the way up. I mean, they finished 11th. They finished 5th. He's a huge part of it. The recruitment as well. I don't think it takes a genius to work out that the recruitment is sort of setting them up to be the team that they're going to be for the next half a decade or so. So all I can think of is it must just be the draw. It must be back to home, if you like, in London. But the amount of risks involved in that for a manager who was not a risk taker, really, certainly not on the pitch. It's baffling. Who knows why it's done? Maybe it is just as simple as want to get back to London, getting paid a lot of money because Spurs are panicking after the whole Christian Gross debate, and they want someone in who is very much not Christian Gross. They want someone in who they see as a steady hand, can consolidate them, can let them build and regroup, but yet doesn't make any sense other than geography or money from what I can think. I don't know what you guys think.
Three reasons I think he does it. 1, London, huge draw. 2, Tottenham are a massive club, and if I get this right, they'll have money to spend. I can definitely do this. I'm not sure I can do this with Leeds. I've got a good team, but, taking it on. Thirdly, I got absolutely fucked over at Arsenal. They threw me to the wolves. I'll show them. And he was bitter about his exit from Arsenal and the way football in general had treated it. He felt that him and Clough were the sacrificial lambs for a widespread practice that went on that everybody did, and yet football had basically scapegoated them and then moved on, and that they had died for everyone's sins basically. And I think that there was an element of revenge involved in it. Plus, it's flattering, isn't it? It's a big club, and they're saying, come and we know all your baggage, but you're so good, we still want you. I think, that appeals to your ego, and George Graham was a man who I think would admit had an ego.
I think that's fair to say. That'll do it for the Premier League. A wee roundup of England and Europe, I suppose. Manchester United, the ignominy of having to get into the Champions League through qualifying rounds as the second English team, going through Vigilodge. It would do all right, but yeah, tough group, isn't it? Barcelona, Bayern Munich, and Gothenburg, I think. Arsenal, Brøndby, sorry. Arsenal back at Wembley. Not quite as horrific a group as the one before, but they will still make a mess of that. Newcastle don't get much further than the first round of the Cup Winners' Cup. Chelsea will do okay in defence of that. The final iteration of the Cup Winners' Cup, bless it. And the UEFA Cup is really disappointing. Leeds don't get past the second round. Aston Villa don't get past the second round. Very entertaining. Celta Vigo clash there, and Liverpool go out in away goals to Valencia. Only one British club gets beyond that stage in the UEFA Cup. So mixed fortunes there, and the writing on the wall internationally as England are defeated by Sweden in Gothenburg, I presume, in their first Euro 2000 qualifier, and then can only draw 0-0 with Bulgaria. So Glenn Hoddle, on a bit of a sticky wicket, he'd be advised not to make any silly proclamations in any interviews that he does upcoming. Thanks, gents. Cheers, David.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Good to be back.
It is indeed plenty to discuss next week as this season of all seasons starts to get into gear. Until then, bye for now.